I'm Maggie Root. I live in San Anselmo and have for about 6 years now with my husband and our 2 kiddos who are 4 years old. My connection to the disability community is that, maybe I should repeat, I'll restart that. I'm Maggie. I live in San Anselmo with my husband and our 2 kiddos, one of whom has disabilities, including autism. We've lived in San Anselmo for about 6 years.
Great. So do you want to start with your story and just dive in, and then we'll kind of pepper in naturally any questions that come up?
Yeah, and by story, do you want like the Baker story or the like San Anselmo story? Like what would be?
I think we have time for both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my kiddos were born just before the pandemic, and when they were about a year old, we started noticing some differences in one of our twins and sought out some early intervention services in the midst of the pandemic, which was already a challenge. We were really lucky to be able to connect with people who provided us resources and guidance and insight. And one of our kiddos was diagnosed with autism and speech delays, coordination differences, and we dove into the disability community, which we had moved to San Anselmo in large part for the schools and for the family sense, and yeah, I guess that's another part of the story. But yeah, so sorry, this is harder than I thought it would be.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
So
start with you. Why you moved here? I think that's a great part of your story.
So we moved to San Anselmo for, in large part, for the schools and the community. We wanted a place where we could walk to downtown and we could know our neighbors, and that our kids would get a great public education, that they'd be in a community of people who were outdoors minded and adventurous and really saw a sense of belonging and community in the downtown area in particular. We looked all over the place. My husband and I have lived in lots of places throughout the U.S. and a couple places in the Bay, and San Anselmo felt like this little hamlet. I think that's even on the logo, or a card that I saw at a store in town, like the coziest little hamlet in Marin or something like that. And it does, it feels cozy here in San Anselmo, and we loved that. And we even felt that early in the pandemic, a sense of community and belonging here. And as our kiddos have aged and we've entered the disability community, our relationship with San Anselmo has changed. And that has been both hard and beautiful at the same time.
Tell me more about that, about how your relationship with the town has changed and how your identity is, with the disability community shaped that. Yeah,
so I'm a nurse, and I had worked with a lot of disabled individuals, particularly children with disabilities. And I felt like I was in this community. My mom was a special education teacher in Marin County. I think my husband and I felt like we're supportive of the disability community and we're aware of the disability community. And then we had a kid who was diagnosed with disabilities, and we realized we had no idea, and that the systems we thought would be in place really weren't. I looked at the Cedars and the art store downtown and thought, oh my gosh, how great, the disability community has a space. Like, there are these disabled artists who are making beautiful work in town. And then I realized, how much interaction is there? Is this a nice to have in our town? Is this, we pat ourselves on the back because we feel good that there are people with disabilities in our community? Or do we really include those people? And I think the hard realization has been, as a parent of kids with disabilities, that our town really isn't set up to include people with disabilities that well. There are areas where we do okay, but by and large, we've found that our kiddo with disabilities is an afterthought or a burden, or the assumption is that they'll receive their services, play, whatever, in a different space that's made for them. The assumption is that there is a space, some other space that my child's supposed to be. And the irony is, this is a space that my kid's supposed to be. This is the town we picked to live in. This is my child's home. This is the only place they've ever lived. And we love this place. And we also feel at times like this place doesn't see our kiddo.
Sorry, pulling myself together. I feel that. And one of the barriers for your family has been school placement. And I'd love it if you could share a little bit about what it feels like when your child's education can't be served within your community.
Yeah. We had always assumed, like, there are a ton of preschools around here. We had assumed that our kid would go to a preschool right in San Anselmo, that there'd be lots of options, that we'd have kind of our pick of the litter, these great preschools that are child-centric and inclusive and support play and learning and growth. And when our kiddo was diagnosed with autism, I started reaching out to the public schools, asking about the educational opportunities. I had been lucky enough to know that we had access to regional center when my kiddo was younger, and we knew that at age 3 that we might be eligible for services, educational services through the school district. And one of the beauties of our family is that we have twins, and my kiddo with disabilities has never lived without being included. In fact, they're always trying to get each other to do new things and try new things. And we couldn't have imagined that they would need to be separated to get a preschool education. And yet, when we started asking around, both at the public schools system and the private preschools, for the most part, the response we got was, oh, well, we don't do that here. Well, we meet your kid, but we really aren't able to support kids like that. And by kids like that, they meant autistic kids, which is a huge range. But it was the fact that my kid's disability made people feel like my child didn't belong in their school. And that knowing that particular autism in California is actually quite prevalent. The idea that because my kid had a diagnosis, they somehow were othered. And they couldn't possibly be around peers, which was sad because my kid is at the playground with peers and is with their twin. And when we look to the public school setting, I'm a researcher and a nurse, and I tried to understand what's the best outcomes for kids with disabilities. Where do autistic kids get the best outcomes in terms of social, emotional, educational, later independence? And hands down, the research says that children with autism or autistic children and other children with disabilities should be educated with non-disabled peers, and that everybody benefits. And so we went looking for that. Like, okay, well, that's what the research says. Like, that's what the community says. That's what the disability community says disabled individuals are entitled to and should be able to receive. And we looked in Marin, and the public schools weren't offering that. It was this idea that my kids wouldn't be able to be educated together, that one of my kids would be segregated because they have a disability. And we ended up sending them to preschool in the East Bay. We left Marin for preschool. How many preschools are there in Marin? Public and private. And we left Marin to find an inclusive preschool that welcomed both of our kids and educated both of our kids, and they thrived because kids are kids. And we see my child without disabilities thriving, being around kids with disabilities. We see my kid with disabilities thriving, learning from peers, supporting peers, and educating peers about their own needs. It's been a really hard space for me to feel like at 3 at 3, we started being told that my kid needed to be somewhere else to play, to receive an education. Yeah. We had, yeah.
You're doing great. I know, it's hard. Oh. So talk about what those spaces look like when you see your kids thriving.
Yeah.
And what San Anselmo could do better. Maybe there are some positive examples.
Yeah.
But what did that look like?
I think one thing I've been impressed by is the responsiveness of the town when I've reached out to point out things or systems that seem to not be working for our family or might not be working for other families in the disability community. We've been happy that folks have stepped up. Parks and Rec, I met with Mike, I think it's Sorello, on the council for Parks and Recreation, and he did a walk around of a playground with me and said, thank you for your feedback. I think the hard part is that we walked around Memorial Park and that playground's been up for a while, and I'm not the first parent to go look at that park and go, wow, this is a really exclusive park, because kids with disabilities, many of them can't access this or safely play here. And I'm not the first parent. I shouldn't have been the first community member, and this should have been something that the town was thinking about from the get-go. And that's the piece. This piece that kids with disabilities are an afterthought or not even thought of at all in the design of spaces or activities. That feels hard, because we know plenty of families who aren't able to go to Memorial Park because it's not a safe or accessible place for them. And it's a really hard spot for our family. My kids love that playground. They love the dinosaur park. And as a parent, it is nerve-wracking for having a neurodivergent kiddo at that playground.
Can you give a couple concrete examples? I think it's about Memorial Park.
Yeah.
That make it so challenging.
Yeah, so I think really when I think about it, I'm thinking about Millennium Playground at Memorial Park. My little guy with disabilities, his disabilities are invisible, and you wouldn't know from looking at him that it's hard to walk on uneven surfaces at times. The entry points to the playground is uneven. I mean, not even considering that you probably couldn't put a wheelchair down the ramp. It's multiple surfaces that are unequal and uneven and unstable. So accessing the play space, my kiddo has to work a lot harder to run on bark than other kiddos. And for families of a child in a wheelchair, I can't even imagine, because we know, parents tell me that navigating bark with a kid in a wheelchair who uses a wheelchair is really hard. The playground has really limited visibility. So when you walk into the space, it's very hard to find your kid. And if you have a kid who elopes or hides or runs away or loses their language when they're overstimulated, you can't just call out and be like, hey, where are you? Because sometimes they won't respond. And if you can't find them, it is nerve-wracking. As a parent, person without disabilities, I'm not even able to navigate some of the narrow steps and pathways to get up into the upper parts of the play space. I can't imagine for a parent who has any mobility disabilities what that's like to try and find your kid in that play space. It's nerve-wracking. The main access point doesn't have a gate, so kids are able to run in and out, which for families of kids without disabilities, that may not be a problem, but for our family, that means I can't leave the gate and we need a second adult to go to that playground, because my kiddo can easily bolt from the playground into the parking lot and there's no barrier. We find that the maintenance is challenging and that my kiddo doesn't have a strong sense of safety. And so when there's things like missing boards or screws that are loose, my kiddo may not be able to control their body in the same way that other kids are around unsafe equipment. And that makes it really challenging to know that my kid is safe if I can't even see what they're playing with. Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, it's so helpful to have that concrete. And more time. Look at how easy that was.
So, I think the other piece is, while I think the Park and Rec staff have been lovely, I recognize that as we've considered signing up for activities and camps, it's not clear that the staff would be able to support my kiddo or other kiddos on the autism spectrum. And as we've also seen in other events and places, the assumption is that the parent will bring some sort of other adult to support your child in the public space, as though I could pay for a one-on-one aide to go with my kid to camp or something like that. And the burdens on parents are remarkable, and the barriers to accessing activities are high. We love going to a lot of the town events downtown when the town is closed down, or the street is closed down, and they have live music and stuff. And they're also really hard. There's often not a safe, quiet space. So the play zones or the kid zones often have really loud music. And having a neurodivergent kid, this is super overwhelming. And it also makes it really hard to find my kid, who often will wander off from those spaces. Having something like a town designated quiet area, a calming space, or a place where there's activities that don't have loud noises would be a really good first step in terms of town events. Things that the town could offer, like making sure that schedules are public when it comes to activities and events. We really have to think about steps ahead of time to make a plan for attending a town event. And when I don't know when the activities are, whether there's going to be a speech or the order of activities, a speech, 2 speeches, 15 minutes of speeches, and then the face painting, that kind of thing. I know it's not that big of a deal to many families, but for our family, when we have to prepare our kiddo for the sequence of events to help them navigate the event, it's really important that we know what's actually going to happen at the event, what space it's going to be in, pictures even of the space that it's going to be in so we can prepare our family what it might look like. A lot of the town events are packed with people. And for our family with an autistic kiddo, that makes it really hard to access those events. They're so jam-packed and full of energy, but that's actually a problem for us to participate. And there doesn't seem to be a space where families who need a different sensory experience can engage with the town in that space. And that's not to say that we don't still come and try these things and love these things and enjoy our time and love being a part of the St. Anselmo community. And most of the time we get home and go, okay, that was really hard. Did I do it okay?
You did it.
Yeah, it's great. Before we cut the camera off and leave your microphone on, we'll do a very short just name and introduction that we may have missed the first round. And